Hi, I'm May. Welcome to Passages and Promises. This is a podcast that invites immigrant guests, each with their unique stories and experiences, to share everything from comfort foods to family history, because becoming a global family starts with embracing the stories that make us who we are. Passages and Promises reveal the human stories behind the immigrant tag. You can find me on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, and TikTok. For this 5th episode, it's going to be a solo talk about the history of bento and my experiences with it as a Japanese person and as someone who grew up in Japan and spent time there for 7 years. Alright, without further ado, let's get into today's Passages and Promises. So recently, I've been seeing a lot of bento videos, both by people of Japanese descent and people who aren't. And I think that's super duper cool, because I'm sure if we go back like a couple decades, or even less maybe, we would have seen there was much less representation of like different cultures, and also specifically food of different culture. I've also heard that in the past, food of non-white cultures, or like specifically cultures that use a lot of spices, those cuisines were looked down upon. Recently, the past maybe decade or two, or maybe even just a decade, especially since social media has been booming, everyone gets to have a platform to share their personal favorites and comfort food. We've seen a lot of food from different cuisines being shared. And even if it isn't all fancy, I think I see bento being shared very frequently. A lot of my feed is just food, quite literally, it's food and K-pop, basically. Well, and then there's also some political stuff. But my feed is basically kind of politics or news, sort of, and then food and K-pop. But then food probably takes up 80%. And a lot of it is if you want to try high protein breakfast, here's a recipe, or an easy 5-minute brownie recipe that only uses 2 ingredients or something like that, right? I do get a bunch of cookie recipes that have nothing to do with eating healthy. It's literally just these gooey, crispy cookies that I constantly see on my page. But anyways, so other than that, I think I see bentos a lot. And for those of you who don't know, it's basically just any food that is carried, or any meal for carrying. Basically, portable food is bento in Japan. And people bring it to school, people bring it to picnics. Sometimes it's specifically for an event. This is actually a picnic that you do in the springtime, but it's called hanami. And basically what people do during a hanami is they sit in a park usually, or sit somewhere where cherry blossoms are blooming, and they bring bentos and also usually traditional Japanese sweets or snacks, and kind of just spend time together watching the cherry blossoms. And I think a big part of hanami is the bento. And this is because, my personal opinion is that the flowers are very colorful. And so when the food in bentos are also colorful, whether it's veggies or rice balls or anything like that, usually they tend to be an assortment of many different colors. And especially in Japanese bentos, nutritious foods are very encouraged. So, of course, you would have those delicious carby, not to say that carbs aren't healthy at all, that's not what I'm saying, but of course you would have the onigiris with rice and maybe something I don't know, beef or pickled plum, I think, pickled. Is that right? An assortment of different colors. And I think it's part of the aesthetic. I think that's the reason why it gets a lot of social media hype as well. But, it's really aesthetic to have a little case full of these colorful, nutritious foods that also taste amazing, because it's seasoned, everything is seasoned differently. For example, while in Japan, there's a lot of focus on having a balanced meals. I mean, I'm sure it's similar everywhere else as well, but it's not like East Asians aren't famous for having balanced, nutritious meal. And not to be harsh, but they also have strict beauty standards that kind of pressure people into not having fast food or ultra processed foods constantly. And so a lot of the bentos are usually very balanced. In my experience, they usually have some sort of protein, whether it's beef or eggs or whatever. I mean, that may come inside a sandwich, or it might be inside a onigiri or a rice ball. And my favorites usually in bentos were karaage, which is basically fried chicken, but it's Japanese style fried chicken. And also I liked onigiris, which are rice balls. But yeah, and so that kind of covers the protein, but you would also have veggies. I mean, they're often pickled or just seasoned very, very deliciously. What my mom frequently makes is this cucumber salad with sesame oil, I think, and some sort of Chinese paste. I'm not really sure. I'm gonna look it up. Give me a second. Like a Chinese soup base or Chinese broth powder. Anyways, she kind of mixes like these different seasonings and it tastes amazing. So yeah, so you get your veggies in. I think it's less common for fruits to be in bentos. And yeah, in Japan, everyone brings bento boxes to school and work, and that's like their lunch. In America and in anywhere else, counts as a bento because that's how it's defined. But I think part of the appeal of calling something a bento is like the Japanese style foods that are inside it. So let's get into a bit of the history. So the word bento originated from the Chinese term biandang, which I have no idea if I'm pronouncing correctly, but apparently it means like something convenient, and so kind of like evolved, and Japan adopted these kanji characters that were interpreted to mean to prepare and set aside for later use, which, you know, aligns with how food was packed for travel or tasks. This was like in the late 1500s in the Azuchi Momoyama period. And then like, you know, as time passed, it kind of evolved further, and maybe the style that we pack bentos in, the things that we pack inside these bentos changed, but the essential concept of carrying food around hasn't really changed. Apparently, before the 1600s, people in Japan didn't eat lunch as a separate meal, and daily eating was just twice a day in the morning and evening, so a formal lunch culture didn't exist. But because travelers and workers still needed food away from home, people carried dried rice so that they could store it without having it spoil, and they would soak it in water before eating. And this kind of developed further into a more common practice of carrying around meals. And then in the even earlier periods, like in the 1200s, government officials carried meals called tonjiki, which was cooked rice shaped into portable portions, which is, you know, essentially an onigiri. And these early practices were the prototypes for bentos that existed way before the word bento itself existed. And then so to talk a little bit about the evolution of bento, I mentioned earlier how like travelers needed portable foods, and it wasn't just travelers, it was also like soldiers who needed like quick meals that they could carry around. So then bento began to refer not to just food, but to the food plus the container. You know, bento boxes are super popular right now, the ones with like compartments, and a lot of them in Japan at least have very cute designs. Like me personally, I have a couple with Sanrio character designs. When I was young, I loved collecting like pink ones, ones with flower designs. And I would also be jealous of my friends who had like a limited edition Sanrio character bento box. I also used to have like a bento box with 3 layers to it. And so this culture of like bentos is becoming more popularized through even just the aesthetic aspect of it. Because, you know, TikTok, Instagram, there's all that aesthetic side of social media where people pack an unnecessary amount of ice in their freezer just because it looks cute, just because it's like pink and everything. And I support, well, don't take this as me supporting over consumption, but you know, if that's what calms people and that's what makes them happy, do whatever you want. But that aesthetic of it is part of the reason why bento is so popular right now on social media, and it goes viral often. So yeah, so the bento boxes, the ones with cute characters, cute designs, those kind of represent the evolution that portable meals went through to be ascribed to not only the food, but the food plus the container. And then in the Edo period, which is like from the 1600s to mid 1800s, bento culture began spreading more widely beyond soldiers and laborers because there was a lot of peace and economic growth, so that encouraged 3 daily meals instead of just 2, so that included lunch, right? And people carried boxed meals during work pauses, and in rural life scenes, you know, there's a lot of documentation of bentos in period art, which I think is super cool because people have been eating these portable lunches and these portable boxes for centuries, right, essentially. And then it also began being associated with outdoor leisure, whether it's boat rides, pilgrimages, festivals, and so bento began being associated with eating outside of home. And then by the mid-Edo period, there were cookbooks being published to explain like what kinds of foods to put in bentos or what would make an aesthetic presentation. And it essentially became about the beauty of a presentable lunch, which is why now daily aesthetic meals are super popular too, right? And in the Meiji era, which is like the mid 1800s to early 1900s, Asian bentos called ekiben became super duper popular. Actually, these are super popular right now as well. And whenever I go back to Japan, I try to have at least like maybe 4 ekibens during my time there. My favorites are the tonkatsu katsando, which is tonkatsu in a sandwich between two breads. I think that's what they're called. In Japanese, they're called shokupan. So basically, like breaded pork, tonkatsu is sandwiched between 2 pieces of Japanese milk breads, and that's my favorite ekiben ever. But there are like other styles too. There are more traditionally Japanese ones with hijiki, or like more veggie heavy, and a lot of colorful pickled foods with maybe like rice and that sort of stuff. And it consisted simply, so back then in the Meiji era, it consisted simply of a rice ball with pickled plum, which isn't uncommon now either. But yeah, so in the past it was just that. And then so let's talk more about containers and their history. Early on, bento boxes didn't really exist, and they were wrapped in bamboo leaves or sasa, which are bamboo grass, because they have antibacterial properties and prevent spoilage. But there were other portable containers too. Like there were kareihi for dried rice and mintsu for porridge and stews. Essentially, portable containers optimized for specific types of foods, right? And then in the early 1100s, there were these things called warigo, which were thin wood box with lids and compartments, which aren't too different from what we have now, but they were basically a precursor to the magewappa, which is a traditional bent wood lunchbox. And then later on, we have like multi-layered jubako, which were used for outdoor meals. And then by the Edo era, the makunouchi bento, which is a compartmented meal eaten during breaks and theater performances. And you see this a lot now too, you might see this in ekibens, or you might see this like for New Year's. It's still a common format of bento boxes. And then so the modern bento culture, it's a little bit different, but it's the essential core and the value of bento hasn't really changed. Right now, I think there's a lot of emphasis on like maybe motherly or familial love that's incorporated into bentos. Like when I was younger, my friends and I would be like, oh my gosh, my mom packed this with this cute seaweed shaped into Hello Kitty or something like that, right? And it was representative of motherly love, and I'm sure it still is. I don't live in Japan right now, but I can't imagine that having changed in the span of like 5 years. Also, it's hard to deny that Japan's a patriarchy still very prominently. So it is more common for the wives to make the bentos for their husbands at work. But even then, I think it shows like a very loving relationship and a mutual understanding of care, which I think is super important in the modern bento culture. And I think it's something that's glossed over by the social media hype, because it's not really just about how it looks pretty. It's really more about how much time and care is spent into making these nutritious, delicious lunches. Today, character bentos or keraben are super popular. I mentioned earlier about seaweed being shaped into Hello Kitty. And basically that's a type of character bento, because they're bentos that are shaped into popular characters. Usually like cute ones like Sanrio characters or anime characters, that sort of thing. But yeah, I just really wanted to talk about how bentos aren't really just about the visually pleasing lunches that you see online. It's about like the care and love that someone puts into making these things for you, because even the cute boxes, they're representative of whoever bought that lunchbox for you, knowing that you like these characters or that you think the flower designs are cute on a lunchbox. And then inside, the foods are usually nutritious, but they're nutritious foods that you like. And that's the whole point of bentos. And it's part of family bonding to be able to make each other lunch and eat that lunch with each other, outside of home, in a happy space with happy meals. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Passages and Promises. If you have a story to share or just want to reflect, leave a comment or fill out the survey link to the description. I'd love to hear how it resonated with you. And if this episode resonated with you, don't forget to share it with someone who might connect with it too. You can also visit the blog on my website where I write about each episode and share some of my own reflections along the way. We all have our own passages and promises, and I hope this podcast gave you a moment to reflect on yours. See you next time when we'll explore the next person's journey and the promises they carry. Bye!